This is an exciting time in Brussels right now. There is a new commission, there is a new parliament, there are many new discussions underway about new policy directions, particularly for energy. The new commission has made energy one of its very top priorities, which is a very interesting policy statement. The overall intention is to get simultaneously energy that's cheaper, that's more reliable, and that is greener. This is a hard ask, and this is where we think technology is going to come in. Now, to begin to answer that, we have been, for the last few years actually, been working on a series of symposia, academic and research symposia, with the support of BP, to look at these issues technology by technology, all the way from carbon capture and storage through to gas and biofuels and clean cars and the rest of it. And you have in your packs a summary of those discussions. You will find them online as well if you're watching. And at the same time, we at Science Business have done our own troll across the world to try to find knowledge about this, from everybody from the human genome pioneer, Craig Venter, to European officials, because they have knowledge about this also. You will also find in your packs a technology outlook, BP's view of the world, of technology going forward, and there's a survey in there as well if you'd like to hand it at the end. But that's enough for preliminaries from us. Let's get into it. I'm delighted to introduce as the opening speaker Dominique Ristori. He is the Director General for Energy from the European Commission, and as such, he is in the thick of it, in the midst of drafting a 5-pillar energy plan for the energy union, and many other things. So, Dominique, may I invite you to take the floor? Yes. You can speak here.
Hi, how are you? Ladies and gentlemen, as Richard said, and as you know, we are entering now in a very challenging period for defining and managing energy issues. We are facing two immediate challenges. One in the context of energy security, particularly connected with the present Russia-Ukraine crisis, and the second one regarding energy and climate context, in particular in the perspective of the next year International Climate Conference in Paris. And for both, energy will be at the heart of the process. And this is correct because, as you know, when we are speaking about energy and climate, 80% of emissions are resulting from energy production and energy use. And regarding precisely the context, of course, presently we have a new Commission, a new Parliament, a new future permanent President of the European Council. All have put the concept of energy union at the center of the scene, and I will come back to that later. But first, I would like to say something regarding the fantastic opportunity we can have concerning the next Paris rendezvous. For the first time, probably, in the history, we have an opportunity, a momentum, to possibly manage an agreement, an historical agreement regarding climate and, in fact, energy. As you know, we reached a full endorsement of our proposal at the occasion of European Council 23rd and 24th of October. And few were expecting a so important success, few weeks before. But we had intensive negotiation with all countries. We managed 56 bilateral Sherpa meetings, but a lot of additional meetings, bilateral, multilateral, finishing with all leaders satisfied with the compromise, including those having, at a preliminary stage, different positions. And the package is ambitious but realistic. Ambitious because when we are speaking about reduction of at least 40% of greenhouse gas emissions, when we are speaking about new increase of renewables in the energy mix, when we are speaking about new important measures for energy efficiency or new development of interconnection for internal energy market, we are not speaking about easy issues. But nevertheless, we finish with a good compromise, a good package, with a capacity to revigorate and to relaunch ETS system, finishing with a price of carbon more in situation to facilitate the shift into the direction of a decarbonization of our economy and first of all, of our energy system. This is extremely important. And at the same time, just after, we see the Americans, the United States of America, and the China going into a sort of similar approach. We Europeans, we are not so surprised because, as you know, President Obama underlined strongly in the recent past the need to manage this shift. And second, we received also here in Brussels the President of China. As you know, China is confronted with extremely difficult situation in big cities due to the deterioration of air quality, and they have to react and to move. But at the time, the European Union first, and immediately after, US and China are going into a similar direction, representing both US and China, I think 45% of global emission in the world, 45%. This is historically crucial. Giving a chance for the first time to well engage and finish the negotiation next year. And this will be absolutely fundamental. And in the context of this negotiation, we will certainly have to speak about legally binding measures, but also voluntary measures. We will have also to well use the capacity of financial institutions to help the process, and also to use the capacity of the civil society, the capacity of smart cities to be present at the heart of the process. And this is fundamental. And this will affect the whole dynamics of the negotiation. And this will affect also the capacity of the energy system to be at the front line of the move, of this revolution. And This move will be absolutely impossible, this is crystal clear, without the support of technologies, the support of research, the support of innovation. Coming back to Europe, as you know, we have now a new vision, Energy Union, supported by the highest instance, European Council, European Parliament, European Commission. What is important today is to shift from the concept to a strategy, to vision, to action. Otherwise, vision without action will remain a daydream. We will present, the Commission will present at the beginning of next year a sort of new document, an Energy Union strategy. Without prejudging the substance, I am convinced this will be managed in some key direction. Of course, into the direction of more security and solidarity through different measures, including diversification of suppliers, in particular for gas. This will be also oriented to new step for internal energy market, and not only new I can say, additional step for deregulation, but also in order to take into account the evolution of energy mix, for managing more and better the internal energy market, to secure the market, to ensure a more efficient coordination of capacities, at regional level first and then European level. This will be absolutely fundamental. Developing, balancing, coupling market, but going beyond, because we are already at risk, independently of the evolution of Russia-Ukraine situation. And we will develop that strongly. But we will also develop strong measures for energy efficiency based on priority sectors, in particular housing sector, transport sector, and efficient product. We will go beyond the present situation regarding decarbonization process, developing all aspects of low carbon energy sources. This will be the case, of course, for renewables, but also for all who wish nuclear. We will also prepare the ground for having a more realistic approach for all sorts of gas, not only conventional gas, but also LNG, and the mapping of shale gas in Europe, because before deciding anything, it is important to know more what is the real situation, and again, science will be extremely important in order to evaluate, to locate the reserve, but also the geology around the reserve, the dimension of reserve, and the economic viability of project. And another key aspect of Energy Union will certainly be technologies. Science, energy technologies. And this is particularly important at a time with generation and production, we will have in the 2 next decades to replace a lot of our power plant. A lot. And this is true regarding all types of power plants. It is valid when we are speaking about nuclear plants. It is valid when we are speaking about gas plant or coal plant. And it will be particularly important to replace all this generation with a new capacity to use the best available technologies covering all aspects. And as you know, technologies are in rapid evolution. This is the case also when we are speaking about the grid, transport and transmission. We are speaking about smart grid, smart metering, at the end smart home. It will be impossible to be performant without the integration of all new information and communication technologies, in particular for the management of the plant. And also for giving to the energy consumer the real command of energy consumption, following consumption and prices at the same time. This will require a new bridge between energy system and research and technologies. And I see that sometimes it is not yet the case. I will give 2 examples. With photovoltaic, we are representing in Europe more than 60% of the world's new installed capacity. But at the same time, 80% of new industrial devices are built in Asia and essentially in China. We cannot repeat the same for new smart metering and smart home, and I have verified the present situation in terms of patents. The Europeans are largely behind, not only the Americans, but also the Chinese, due to the lack of capacity to build a new bridge between energy system and energy companies, research organization, and industry. We in the Commission, we will manage a new team-oriented approach. Accordingly, we are associating already all our departments at an early stage. But this will not be sufficient. This should be prolonged at all levels, national level, local level. I spoke before about generation. If you are considering hydrogen, for example, how this will be possible to possibly produce hydrogen not only from coal or gas tomorrow, but also from renewables or nuclear, if we will not connect all our research department in order to identify key priorities and to concentrate on these priorities. Because this will be important not only for managing electromobility or clean transport, but also for the stabilization of the grid and for storage. Because storage will represent also a new priority, and it was an error in the past not to examine that with a sufficient level of priority. We will have also to manage, in the context of energy demand, the new approach of energy and transport in the cities. I refer to smart cities. And smart cities will be at the heart of the global negotiation and the global process. But technologies today are mature for introducing electromobility at the heart of our cities, for massively produce electric car or hybrid car. I'm speaking about in the context of clean urban car or clean short distance car. But how it will become possible to organize that if we will not agree a common approach for recharging system? And I would like to see in that context a new capacity using all instruments, including the set plan, oriented into the identification between European level, but also with all stakeholders, identification of real key priorities and the capacity to concentrate on these key priorities, connected with generation, transport and distribution, storage and demand. And it is important also to note that sometimes the reality is in contradiction with expert views. The revolution, energy revolution in the state has never been predicted by experts. And nevertheless, in few years, the production of unconventional gas is today representing more than 50% of the global US gas production, having strong effect on the whole competitiveness of US economy. Because as you know, energy is affecting not only each individual, day and night, not only key indispensable sectors as health sector or hospitals, but also affecting the whole economy and not only intensive industries. But I am more confident if we will use this opportunity today, having in mind the new importance of energy at the heart of key processes, I mean climate and energy issues, as well as energy security, in order to connect energy and research department, as well as industry. This is a unique opportunity, and at the same time, we have this momentum allowing us to manage that at the highest level. I mean, in Europe, at the level of the European Council, and we will have regular report regarding energy union to European Council. And as you know, it is impossible to manage that below. And at the same time, a fantastic new opportunity. And it is why this is a real momentum in the context of the global negotiation next year in Paris. Having for the first time a new panorama, not expected by many. You remember the position of many actors a few months ago at the time we were preparing the 2030 framework. For the first time, we have three key leaders, European Union, United States, and China, ready to cooperate positively regarding a so important final negotiation. Thank you very much for your interest.
Thank you very much, Dominique. Let's immediately look at this question from another perspective, and that's from the other side of the Atlantic. I'd like to invite Cheryl Miller, the director of the U.S. Advanced Research Projects Agency, Energy, otherwise known as ARPA-E, which is a very unusual U.S. energy research agency. Cheryl, please.
Please, could I use the hand mic? Thank you very much. It's a wonderful time to be here. As Monsieur Ristori said, it's a historic time for what's going on here in Europe as well as in the US and China. What I'm going to take just a few minutes to talk to you about is building on your comments, to talk a little bit about why was ARPA-E put in place and what are we seeing already in our just 5.5 years of existence. So ARPA-E was envisioned in 2007 as a response to a view of a potential crisis in the US, a National Academies report called Rising Above the Gathering Storm, if that's not ominous enough, that called for the formation of an energy agency modeled on DARPA to go beyond where we saw today's energy technologies taking us, to take bold new steps into the future. And so the agency itself was stood up in 2009, and so we've existed for just over, it'll be 6 years in May. We have about $1 billion worth of funding that we have put to work during that time. We're a little over 100 people in total, and about 30 of those people are on rotation from the industry and the private sector. We come in for 3 years and go out. It's intended to reduce bureaucratic drag and have people who are very, very urgent to come in and change the world. And so if we look at what's the ARPA-E mission, it's to catalyze and support the development of transformational energy technology with the idea of reducing energy import, reducing emissions, and improving energy efficiency. And that's it. That's ARPA-E's mission. It's a very, very broad mission, and that's very, very intentional. It's not intended to focus on one particular aspect of our energy challenges or another. It's intended to put a very, very wide sweep out there and allow us to focus on everything from transportation challenges, electric vehicles, to the question about availability of rare earths to make electric motors for wind turbines and electric vehicles, to processing of metals if we're going to lightweight cars, to carbon capture, distributed generation, both renewable as well as fuel cell. So it's a very, very wide mission. And so what then really matters is how do you go about executing on that mission? And so if you look at what makes an ARPA-E project, right, we do not do basic science. There's a very, very large part of the Department of Energy that does basic science. But what we look to do is to take that basic science and accelerate it towards a place where it could be adopted by the market, right? And so we talk about impact. Are the things that we're going after large impact? Generally speaking, in energy, that would be true, but we really do look at, is there potentially a path where it could be commercialized? Not today, maybe not for 5, 10, 20 years, but do we see a path to commercialization? Is it transformative? Does it go beyond today's roadmaps? So there's a lot of the applied offices at DOE and a lot of places around the world. We're going after driving technologies down their learning curve, so to speak, right? We've done one in solar in a variety of maybe not so anticipated ways. We've gone from quite expensive solar to very, very cheap solar. We've gotten to the point that solar can now be financed, and it's now being in the public markets. It was a combination of technology, policy, and international dynamics around that got us there. Do we see paths for the technologies that we're funding to be transformational even to those technologies in the future? Are they bridging? Are they taking science and transforming it into technology? But most importantly is the question under bridging, will it catalyze new interest in investment? Because the reality is, when we have an idea, we don't have something that's a product in the market. And ultimately, innovation only matters when it's implemented. It's the only way that it's really going to drive us to our future. And so at ARPA-E, a very fundamental question is, how do we accelerate the process of ideas to market? So we pick a really big idea and we ask ourselves, well, if it works, will it matter? And when the answer to that question is yes, we ask, how will it matter? Who's going to have to be involved to matter? And we look at, why do things fail on their way to the market? They often fail because you don't have the right team, you don't have the right assessment of value, or you have poor implementation. And we can summarize almost anything, policy, markets, into those buckets. And so at ARPA-E, we go after all of those things at the same time. So we've actually changed the model of innovation. And so what we've done actually is, you look at this top arc, we identify a white space. We reframe a problem. So ARPA-E is not about defining some new form of energy, at least not that I've heard lately in our office. But we are about reframing the problem, because most of our problems are because we're up against the same constraints. So, you know, we battle the whole question of energy density in batteries. And we keep pushing and pushing and pushing, trying to get more energy density into batteries. And we are succeeding. We're seeing electric vehicles moving. But suppose we reframe the whole question and say, we don't actually care about the battery. I don't go out to my garage and drive my battery. I go out to the garage to drive my car. And suppose I reframe the problem as I need the energy density in my vehicle. Why can't I re-envision my vehicle battery as an integral part of my car? Why can't I take the chemistries that are known on the grid scale storage side, safe chemistries, water-based chemistries, chemistries we would not have brought into vehicle technology? Why can't I think about the electrolyte itself as absorbing impact? Why can't I think about that battery as failing safe? And so why can't I frame this question in a very, very different way and then invite very different people to my problem sessions? And so I bring a community together with me to say, why can't we do this? And many people, to your point, are going to say that this is impossible. You can't do that. There's a lot of reasons why you can't do something. There's a lot of reasons why the world was flat when the world was flat. But the minute that it started to be challenged, you move it to the plausible. And eventually you move it to the inevitable. And so ARPA-E is all about how do you get technology to be part of the inevitable. And you do that in a number of ways. And so we have both deep technical folks who are our program directors, but we also have an equally talented group of people we'll call our technology to market advisors. You might think of them as internal consultants. And they are there with our teams. We tend to give out 3-year, $3 million grants to people. And when we go in to give someone their money, they love this question. Here's your money, and what happens at month 37? What happens when the money is gone? How do we move to a place beyond the end of this project successfully? And so we meet people where they are. Maybe at the end of our project, they'll need more research. Maybe at the end of our project, they'll be ready to spin out a company. Maybe they'll be ready to do a test bed on a military site. Maybe they'll want to license their technology. But at that moment in time, that will only happen if before that they've actually taken action. Have they understood the market and the techno-economics? Do they really understand do small companies exist in this space? Do they understand that Volvo's supply chain is not the same as Mercedes' supply chain? Are they talking to the right people? Do they understand the regulations? If we invent in this space, will the regulations even allow that technology to be existing, right? We face these, renewable fuel standards and certain things we invent. They wouldn't fit de facto. And so we have to have a conversation over time about how would those things be different. Do the folks have the skills and resources they need to move things ahead? Many technologists, when you ask them to put together a pitch deck to sell someone in their story, will give you 10 technical slides and a thank you. Well, maybe we need to bring in a little bit about the market. Maybe we need to bring in a little bit about the economics. Maybe how would this product even be made? Or is it a product? Or is it only a part of a product? What am I really selling? Who gets to define value for my product? All of these questions need to come together. And we actually do extensive stakeholder engagement. We have maps. If you're going to invent new magnet materials to allow us to deal with the rare earth situation that happens, you have to understand everything from the mine all the way to the wind turbine motor. Who plays and why? How do they hold power? Why are all the patents held in Japan? Is the supply chain even existing anywhere else? Things that are important to know if you're going to invent fast, if you're going to be accelerative. And so we actually have these conversations both at the agency level with groups of awardees as well as with each individual project. We have the advantage with our model that we tend to fund both open solicitations. So we send out a solicitation, we'll have 4,000 applications. And we'll solicit about 400 full applications from that and select about 75 projects. So those are one really cool projects. Like one of the challenges, if we took every energy efficiency thing we could put in this room, we'd probably have 5,000% of the efficiency of the room, right? How do you know which one you need? And today we tend to go with IR guns and maps and photos, and we map the room as to what would be most useful to help us with energy efficiency here. We actually funded a technology in one of our open calls. It's actually a backpack that allows you to do kind of a Google Street View of the room, both a view as well as a thermal map. We could see every one of your cell phones. We could see the light fixtures. We could see the cooling around the edges of the windows so that we could truly see what might make a difference in this room to help it be more efficient. We never would have done this project without this type of funding. The other way we do funding is focused solicitation. We'll take $30 million to a problem and we'll say about our batteries, let's put 10 different teams with different approaches together. And the advantage there is that we have these 10 teams as a cohort. They're partners in this. And we invite them together once a year to share how they're doing with the research, how are their problems getting solved. But in addition, we invite experts. We invite people from the existing industry. We invite people who might be from adjacent industries to come and share knowledge and network. And again, to move with these teams from the impossible to the plausible. Because relationships take time. I've never, ever, ever in my entire business career signed a contract with someone that I met yesterday afternoon. And it's just the way of relationships, right? They take time. And if we don't give the time while these projects are evolving, why would I expect at the end to show up and say, oh, I have this really cool thing, would you like to buy it? Right? If they've never seen this thing or contemplated how it fits, how do I expect that to go forward? And so we really work on both relationship, awareness, value, and the technology at the same time. And we've seen a tremendous amount of traction with this. As I said, we've funded in 375, almost 400 projects across 19 focused areas. Everything, as I said, from electric vehicles to different types of fuel, taking CO2 and a source of electrons through microbes to actually form liquid fuels. The bugs can generate it, probably about this much at a time, but they're getting there. So we're way out there. It's rare earth magnets, re-envisioning metals processing. If you're going to take steel and replace it with titanium, aluminum, and magnesium, the footprint of those materials should be both emissions as well as energy better than they are today. The Pigeon process and the Hals-Héroult process have not been revisited in a very long time. Power electronics, hardware and software to route the grid, carbon capture technology that uses no chemicals and no moving parts, stolen from the jet engine industry, right? Can you actually do these things? And so we continue in our 5.5-year journey here, but we started to measure actual real tangible results, which I think is the other thing. I could talk to you about this theory, but can you actually demonstrate that it works? And so it's still early, so we have the benefit of youth, right? But we have over 16 of our projects have actually gone on to partnerships with other part of government. Everything from flow batteries in a system with a couple of buildings worth of solar panels on a grid at a building, at an Air Force base, to carbon capture technology being scaled up by other parts of DOE. We've had over 24, getting up closer to almost 36 new companies formed. And these are companies coming out of universities and starting up and getting their first legs under them. We've had many of our projects form partnerships with existing companies. About a third of our money goes to small companies, already formed small companies, sometimes their first funding. Some of them have IPO'd. We had one that actually is starting to sell battery inverter technology they actually announced they were selling to Sharp technology that we funded. We've seen flow batteries move forward. A couple of them have been bought. Lockheed Martin bought one of the storage startups, another one just the other day in the solar field. We also have half a dozen products in the marketplace, everything from software to route the grid to flow batteries to silicon wafer technology and the like. And we've seen pretty good traction even with the venture community. 22 projects that we invested $95 million in have garnered well over $625 million of funding. And so the traction is beginning. I think the model is proving to be real. It is definitely, it is probably rugby at its finest. It's blocking and tackling at the inch level, right? You are at the project level, but there is no magic, there's no silver bullet here. But it does allow us to change what's possible, I think, as we think about the long-term energy future around the world. So look forward to the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Cheryl. And before we get to discussion, I'd like to introduce another speaker to present yet a third view. This one, a global view from an industry perspective. And I'd like to introduce, therefore, Iain Conn, the Group Managing Director of BP. Iain, please.
Well, thank you, Rich. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, and once again, welcome to this event. And just like to thank Science Business for working with us all here. We're here to address a very complex problem that how can the EU shape a future that combines three factors: economic competitiveness, energy security, and environmental sustainability. It's been described as a trilemma. I think that's a bit of an old word these days, but there are no easy answers. And one of the best ways to work towards solutions is open dialogue among people with knowledge and responsibility in the field, people such as those in this room. This is my last official speech as a director of BP. I'm going to be joining Centrica in a few weeks' time, but the reason for switching companies is the same as when I joined BP 29 years ago. The energy business is fascinating and rather complex and fundamental to economic growth, development, and human progress, as we all know. Our everyday lives are filled with products created through European... Sorry, I'll start again. Today I want to start with a very big picture, which is the role of energy in the world's economy and society. And then I want to focus on the challenges and priorities for Europe specifically and the role of technology in that. To begin at the global level, energy by almost any measure accounts for around 10% of the world's economy. And that 10% underpins the other 90. And I think this is a fact that a lot of people just don't realize, that in monetary terms, we spend about $7 trillion a year on energy to fuel an economy of about 70 trillion. The issues of competitiveness, energy security, and sustainability are huge, and changing the equation that binds them all together takes time. Europe has been struggling to change its energy system to address these big issues. It's been a worthwhile struggle, and Europe's made significant progress. However, this has exposed the magnitude of the task, and I now believe European governments are waking up to the timescales and costs involved in changing such a huge system. I'd like to identify 4 important aspects which make the European context particularly challenging. Firstly, Europe's a region of contrasts when it comes to energy. The EU uses around 15% of the world's oil and 13% of its gas, but its reserves are 0.4% and 0.8%. This imbalance has consequences for the cost of energy in the EU. Secondly, the EU sought to lead on sustainable energy policy. This has had consequences for public finances and the cost of energy in the EU. Thirdly, the EU social market economic model provides many universal public services with minimum wage levels and relatively high standards of welfare, but this has consequences also in terms of labor costs in comparison with competitors, particularly in Asia. Fourthly, the EU has seen some erosion in the scale and competitiveness of its great manufacturing sector. Manufacturing, particularly high-end, value-added manufacturing, remains a mainstay of the EU economy, particularly its exports. And manufacturing requires significant energy and labor inputs. Now, on the positive side, Europe's been key to many innovations in the world of energy. The world measures energy in units of European surnames: joules, watts, volts, ohms. And the world moves and manufactures using machines invented by great Europeans: Daimler and Benz, Rolls and Royce, Diesel, Whittle and Siemens. Our everyday lives are full of products created through European innovation from companies such as Ericsson, British Telecom, Alcatel, and many more. I'm mindful that these great innovators did not see their work as parceled up into boxes marked energy, economy, environment. The issues are interwoven, and in Europe we've tried, not always successfully, to respond to that fact with an integrated approach to policy. One manifestation of that effort was the creation of a high-level group on competitiveness, energy, and the environment in 2006-07. I had the privilege of serving on that group, and its remit was to advise the EU and to provide cohesion between these policies. An important contribution was made by that group to the 2020 by 2020 framework. Looking back, I now see that work as part of a distinct phase in the evolution of what I call the EU's post-climate change awareness energy policy. The first phase spanned 95 to 05. It was a phase of visioning and alignment, shaping ideas and concepts to satisfy multiple goals. The second phase, from 2005 to now, was one of experimentation and growing understanding, including the need to integrate the goals of competitiveness, security, and sustainability, and to propose pragmatic targets. Policies, technologies, and constructs have been developed and tested. Some have done well, some have not done well. Notably, I think the emissions trading system, which I'll come back to, and targets for renewable energy and energy efficiency. The third phase is starting now, and it needs to be one of pragmatic action as we pass the baton to a new Commission. The EU's made a confident start on this phase with the 2030 vision, and I welcome the EU's recent emphasis on industrial competitiveness, improvements in energy efficiency and infrastructure. So what then should be the direction of travel for this next part of the journey? I'd like to urge EU's policymakers to focus on 4 interrelated priorities. The first is to learn from experience. The EU needs to build on its strengths and address its weaknesses. A clear strength is the EU's lead in what we know as energy intensity, the energy required to generate each unit of GDP. Very roughly, in the US, it requires about 1 barrel of oil equivalent of energy to generate $1,000 of GDP. In China, it takes 2.5 barrels. In Europe, we require only 3/4 of a barrel, less than 1/3 of the energy consumption of China for an equivalent economic impact. This is in large part because Europe leads the world in the production of fuel-efficient vehicles and energy-efficient buildings. Our factories and industrial plants are also relatively energy efficient. This advantage must be maintained and exploited. The weakness that the EU needs to address is its struggle with other aspects of competitiveness, including our price of the energy units we use, which significantly offsets our efficiency and our high labor costs. These are significant competitive disadvantages. Europe has labor costs that are generally more than double those of Asia, and at the same time it has energy costs that are roughly double those of the United States. This partly explains why the EU economy is struggling to grow while China's economy is still expanding at over 7% a year, and the US GDP is also picking up. Ironically, in the effort to shape a future that's both environmentally progressive and competitive, Europe has been leading, but I put it to you that on its present path, it cannot win. The US has not been leading, forgive me, but may be winning. And China has the greatest potential contribution, and if we engage with China, she may yet lead. And this week, we've seen a milestone in terms of renewed leadership by the US and China, with the new targets announced in Beijing. John Kerry called it something of great consequence, designed to inject momentum into the global negotiations. The US has set itself a more ambitious emissions reduction target of up to 28% by 2025 versus 2005, while China has pledged to bring her emissions to a peak in 2030. These are important steps towards the kind of clear, stable global carbon policy framework we wish to see, and we need to look at the EU's environmental aspirations in that context. The EU's carbon dioxide emissions from energy are relatively small in global terms, 4 billion tons last year out of a world total of 35 billion. China's alone are around 9.5 billion. And the EU total will fall to 3 billion tons in a world total of 44 by 2035, about 7%. So we need to think very carefully about how far in front of the rest of the world we want to be when we are less than 10% of the world's emissions. And that EU total has come down by around 500 million tons in the last decade. Meanwhile, the US accounts for 5.9 billion tons of CO2 emissions from energy, and there too, the totals come down by roughly 500 million tons over the same time frame. Some of this is attributable to economic factors and increasing energy efficiency, both sides of the Atlantic, but there's also an important difference. Much of the US reduction arises from the application of technology to develop shale gas. This has provided significant volumes of economically viable natural gas that's taken the place of coal in many power plants. Gas now makes up 30% of energy in the US, but only 24% in Europe. And that gas is much cheaper than Europe's. Meanwhile, the EU's focused very strongly on renewables alongside energy efficiency as the major route to a lower carbon economy. And while CO2 reduction has been achieved, the relative cost of a focus on renewables has created a significant burden for companies and consumers. In other words, the US has achieved a similar reduction in emissions over a decade, but at much lower cost to economic competitiveness relative to Europe. I believe there's a big lesson for the EU here about the importance of natural gas in the near-term competitiveness, near-term energy security and sustainability. Replacing just 1% of the coal used in the world's power plants with natural gas would reduce emissions by as much as increasing global renewable energy production by 11%. 1% for 11%. And as Professor Marc-Olivier Betzoiger of Cologne University said at the round table on natural gas, if we continue to subsidize renewables, we basically crowd out gas. Among the big questions for policymakers in Europe, therefore, are these. First, the degree to which the industries that provide our competitiveness should have to carry the costs associated with lowering carbon emissions through renewables when those industries are working hard to compete and when Europe's emissions are heading for a situation where by 2035 they will be lower than those of India alone. And secondly, have we got the balance right relative to the compelling alternative that is available in the form of natural gas? So that takes me to the second priority for energy policy, which is to rebalance Europe's focus. This rebalancing takes several forms. The first, in my view, is to rebalance the objectives of policy so as to address the economic and environmental issues together. I believe logic dictates that competitiveness should become a much more significant policy driver. And as I've indicated, I believe there's a strong case for rebalancing policy so as to encourage natural gas and ongoing energy efficiency, as well as renewable energy. And let me be clear, this does not erode my support or BP's support for the ETS system. In fact, there's a strong argument for using a market-based trading system like the ETS to continue to create a carbon price that can drive down emissions economy-wide cost-effectively, and we have got it in place in Europe. The difficult balancing act for policymakers is one of price level and timing in the ETS, and to shape the ETS in such a way that it takes account of all material factors, including the need to maintain competitiveness over time, as well as the need to limit greenhouse gas emissions. My third policy priority is the shaping of pragmatic pathways for two big applications of energy, power and transport. And perhaps this should be part of an agreed European energy philosophy or part of the energy union that we heard about earlier. In terms of power, I'll put it to you that the evidence from the US and elsewhere demonstrates that the pragmatic pathway in power is energy efficiency, natural gas, and for some countries, nuclear, in addition to selective, cost-effective renewable generation. And we must also continue to invest in research into longer-term renewable options. For transport, I'd advocate it's about fuel economy, downsized, boosted, hybridized internal combustion engines, and the use of competitive biofuels. And again, we need to research longer-term options, including electric vehicles. But electric vehicles will not decarbonize our energy system if the grid is not decarbonized. I think these pathways are broadly consistent with many of the views expressed in the roundtable discussions. Very briefly, my fourth and final policy priority for the EU is to play a global role and continue to do so in energy foreign relations. Europe should use its influence on the international stage to help shape a better energy future, and one in which the EU can create value from the strength that's built up over the years. BP has suggested that energy should be, or have been, I'm not sure whether the train has left the station, an explicit theme within the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, with the aims of improving the competitiveness of both sides of the Atlantic. Europe must continue to play a proactive role in climate change negotiations, not least because of the opportunities to monetize its expertise in energy efficiency, by exporting or licensing technology. However, the UNFCCC progress and process can be very, very slow, with the need to align 196 countries, and it requires accelerants to move things along independently, and often these arise from the application of technology. I also think that G3 is a very important thing, which is the EU plus the US plus China, and maybe this week's announcements will make a big difference in allowing G3 to accelerate G196. And let's not forget that the EU also punches above its weight in the energy industry, with many global and international companies based here, such as Shell, EDF, Areva, RWE, Total, and of course BP and Centrica. These businesses and many smaller specialist firms make a significant contribution to international energy relations and the broad application of advantaged technology. So this brings me specifically to the roles then that technology can play in European energy. Technology stimulated by the right market forces, as Cheryl said, gives me hope we can square the circle of Europe's energy challenges. Technology essentially serves four ends in the energy industry: helping to support safety and reliability, assisting in finding and developing new resources, increasing energy efficiency per unit GDP, and enhancing the sustainability of the methods of energy production and consumption. In each area, Europe has the potential to harness technology in support of its own energy policy and to enhance European competitiveness in the wider world. In safety, for example, corrosion is a big issue, and particularly where complex pipework is involved in refineries and gas plants. And online corrosion probes and guided wave technology are improving our approach significantly. Technology is also helping the EU to find new resources and helping EU companies to lead globally in this area. The scope for progress here involves finding new oil and gas fields and developing non-fossil alternatives. But it also, and critically, includes increasing the recovery factor from the resources we've already found. BP's long-term technology view that David Iain guided indicates that simply applying the best technologies available today could increase the recoverable resource base from around 3 trillion barrels of oil equivalent to around 5. And new technology developments could add a further 2.5 trillion. One aspect of this is enhanced oil recovery. Historically, we've only been able to produce around 35% of a typical oil field's resources. We are now developing enhanced oil recovery technologies that are taking recovery rates to over 60% in some cases. These are coming out of our laboratories in the UK and being deployed around the world, as well as close to home in the North Sea. As an example, when we deploy our new low sal technology in Clare Ridge in the North Sea in the next few years, we expect it to recover an additional 42 million barrels of oil at an incremental cost of about $5 a barrel. Looking to the contribution of technology to energy efficiency, this is the area where Europe needs to maintain its lead, and that's why the Commission is right to have a clear plan for continuing improvements in this area. Key applications, of course, have to be in the areas of buildings, power generation, and transport. Significant inroads on fuel economy are possible with the ability to approximately double the fuel economy of the world's car park today with today's technology. Lubricants even plays an important role, and through Castrol, for example, BP's a leader in this area. We helped to co-develop the Ford Fox engine using lubricants as part of the efficiency gains. And energy efficiency overlaps with the final application of technology in energy, and that's that of sustainability, and particularly carbon constraint. Technology contributes to this area in several ways. As well as being central to energy efficiency, it's fundamental to the production of gas as a cleaner alternative to coal, and it's critical in the effort to commercialize renewable energy. Much of that last effort is, of course, taking place in the R&D setting in companies and universities around Europe. And I'd like to just make a wider point here that the EU possesses a material competitive capability in its world-class R&D base, plus the ability to join forces across national borders to collaborate in mission-directed, multidisciplinary R&D programs. This capability needs to be maintained, and some would argue that Europe's still behind the US on multidisciplinary collaboration. The Horizon 2020 program is a strong example, though, of publicly funded research. We also need to continue to make Europe an attractive place for private sector R&D, for example, by simplifying processes around intellectual property. In BP, we seek to maximize the advantage of being based within such a rich R&D environment by investing a considerable proportion of our research budget in the EU. One example is the €80 million 10-year investment we're making in the BP International Centre for Advanced Materials, or ICAM, in Manchester, but it also involves Imperial College and Cambridge University and Illinois. These institutions, primarily European, are world leaders in developing new materials such as alloys, coatings, and membranes. So let me conclude by summarizing the argument I've set out. Firstly, energy is fundamental to the global economy. I don't need to tell you that, but a secure, sustainable, prosperous future obviously depends on getting energy right. Second, the EU has reached a very challenging moment in economic terms, with high labor costs and high energy costs, partly resulting from its well-intentioned support for renewable energy as a leading pillar in dealing with its energy challenges. The EU therefore needs to learn from experience and rebalance its approach to focus more on competitiveness and broaden the scope of policy to reduce emissions, particularly by extending its leadership in energy efficiency as manifested in energy intensity to the access and use of more natural gas, whether domestic or imported from its rich gas or gas-rich neighbors. Pragmatic pathways can be encouraged, and we know what they are, for power and transport. The EU should also leverage its global influence to the full in leading foreign energy relations. Technology is fundamental to the success of this rebalancing and to each of the priorities that I've outlined. Technology can support safety, it's key to the search for new resources, it's the enabler of energy efficiency, and it's necessary to balance the environment with competitiveness to create a more sustainable future. I think the EU is very well equipped to take a leading role in developing energy-related technology, given its strengths as a powerhouse of innovation and research. And all of us here today have a part to play on this journey, and I look forward to continuing it with you, albeit in a different company. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Iain. Please, go ahead. Could I have Cheryl and Jeppe please come up and join us? So now let's do some talking. We're going to begin first with a little discussion here, but then I'll come to you and to your Twitter questions as well. First, I would like to welcome on the panel Jeppe Kofod. Jeppe is a new member of the European Parliament from Denmark. He's a member of the Socialists and Democrats Alliance, and you are yourself very interested involved in energy issues in the Parliament, a member of the ITRE committee. So Jeppe, thank you for joining us. And because you're just joining us, let me pick on you first, okay? So both Cheryl and Iain mentioned the news from Beijing. What do you make of it?
Well, first of all, I agree that it's great news that now we have the three main powers in the world that now agrees about targets when it comes to reduction of CO2 emission. That's good news, and I think, and it's also some surprise to many Europeans that actually China and US managed to make such a deal. I mean, we can talk about the G2 world, but I hope we can also talk about the G3 world, because this is also a signal that China and US are going to collaborate on a lot of issues, I think, and that's both a threat and an opportunity, in my opinion.
A threat?
Well, I mean, not in this area, but more in general, I think it's important that Europe also try to have stronger ties with the US, I think I mentioned the TTIP and energy policy, for example, as part of a trade agreement will be good in that respect, for example. But I want to say that for this deal is good. It will lay the foundation for even, I think, better deal in Paris next year when we have to make a global deal. So that's really good news. And if you look at the Chinese decision, I mean, they say they want to peak latest in 2030 when it comes to CO2 emission. But they also say that they want to have a bigger share of their energy mix should be renewable energy, non-fossil fuel energy. And in my opinion, this is also a great opportunity for Europe to develop and strengthen our renewable energy sector and have a new industry. We have an industry already, but expand the industry. We have a new market in China if we know how to deliver the right technology to them. So I think it's also a business opportunity for us in Europe when it comes to, for example, renewables and also energy efficiency.
Yes, that 20% target for either renewables or non-fossil, depending on how you read the translation, is quite an opportunity.
Yeah.
Cheryl, could I just come to you? I mean, it's your government that was involved in this. It's on, yes. Well, how does it affect what you will do at ARPA-E? Does it at all?
No, I mean, I think to Jepe's point, it's a historic moment for the world to have so many of the major players in the world putting agreements out there, and now it's going to matter how we do that. From ARPA-E's perspective, though, our mandate to stay out there pushing the envelope on what's possible in technology wouldn't change no matter what all these agreements mean, right? Because we are really out there with something that is going to happen later. It's going to pull us forward. And so I am, personally very excited, but I don't see any changes at all in the types of programs, the breadth of programs, and the optionality that ARPA-E is going after.
Is it feasible? Is it enough? The targets? You come in on this too.
I have no idea at this point.
I think we have to see. I mean, if we want to stay below the 2 degrees goal, I think we have to look at this. But it's a good, very, very good start at a historical moment. I think I agree. But we have to see whether we can still achieve the overall climate objective to stay below 2 degrees, and we have to calculate that a little bit. But I think we lay the foundation now, and the thing that we have targets which US and also China resisted previously. I think it's really, really a good news for Europe too.
Iain, what do you make of it?
So I think, as I said, I think it's great as an accelerant because G3 alignment would be really powerful for the global solution. However, a couple of words of caution. I don't necessarily think it's that good for Europe, and I'll explain why. I mean, it illuminates that Europe's target of 40% reduction by 2030 versus 1990 is quite a long way ahead. So, if I'm not mistaken, the US target translates into 16% from 1990 to 2025 versus 40 in Europe. And I've just explained that Europe is less than 10%, or will be less than 10% of the world's CO2. So I think Europe's got to think really carefully about how far ahead it wants to get. And the other thing I'd say that is really exciting about it, but Europe's going to have to figure out the consequences competitively, is that China is going to surprise everyone. I really believe that. And Europe may find itself competitively left behind. And that's, China's had a cap and trade system for 15 years. It's just been in sulfur dioxide, not carbon dioxide. The Chinese are very capable of rapid acceleration in policy. And I think Europe's leadership in renewables could turn out, with the cost associated with it, to give Europe a very big economic headache at a time when, albeit extremely welcome from a climate point of view, that the 3 big blocs are starting to get active, Europe needs to think very carefully about the competitive consequences of its leadership position.
Jeppe, if I could come back to you, I mean, we are at a moment of austerity. Economic difficulty. Not quite sure if we're in austerity anymore, but we'll see. Is there any concern in the Parliament about the economic impact of this push?
Of course, but I mean, it depends on how you look at the situation. If we're going in, I think also you mentioned that, we're going into a new investment cycle when it comes to energy production. Of course, if you look at the current power plants in Europe, coal-driven, it's very cheap to still use them or maybe expand their life, but it's not very good for the environment or for innovation for that matter, I think. So if you look at investment, in a new investment circle, I think it's important to say that we have renewable technologies that are competitive to traditional fossil fuel technologies. For example, onshore windmills, for take one example. So I think there's a myth out there that renewables is more expensive than traditional energy production or traditional fossil fuel-based energy. So that's the one thing I want to mention. And the other thing is that what is good about the European framework and also now China and US is that for investors, I think it's a good signal. I mean, they have to see far out in the future what is the targets before they invest, for example, in alternative energy resources. And I think here we have good signals, both from Europe. I mean, the 2030 package is a good step, not enough in my opinion. And now we have China and US also with targets. It's good for investment, and it's good for, I think, more clean energy.
Iain?
Can I just come back on Jeppe's point about renewables being cheaper or as cheap? I think it very much depends where and how. And just the punctuation mark I want to just use to eliminate this. We all know about the Energiewende in Germany. The surcharge on electricity in Germany arising from the Energiewende is more than the total cost of electricity in the United States. The surcharge from the Energiewende in Germany is $85 per megawatt hour, and the cost of electricity in the United States is $69. And you're telling me, therefore, that renewables is just as cheap. It depends how you do it. And I think that, and also, we need to take into account the cost of intermittency. Just to be clear, I am very pro a balanced energy policy, and including significant amount of renewables, but the unintended consequences of some of the policy actions of some countries are very, very self-evident, and we need to learn from it.
Iain, well, wait a minute, but let's come back to this question. I mean, you are with an oil company, right?
I would say that, wouldn't I?
Well, that's exactly the question and the point. So what is the how would all of this affect the energy industry?
Well, look, first of all, I am with an oil company, but I think I'm with a very progressive oil and gas company that thinks deeply about these issues. And I think all we're trying to do is demonstrate we've learned a lot, both good and bad, about how the experiments have gone. Denmark's done tremendously well in the way it's balanced that. I don't think every economy has, and so we need to figure out how to learn from it. The energy industry knows enough from our experiments of the last 20 years to know what works more and less and what works better or worse. And we should be collectively trying to create pragmatic pathways to make the biggest inroads possible now, not continue to make mistakes. And one of the issues is policymakers picking winners and forcing policies for long periods of time which don't have any ability to be adjusted. We've learned that we learn as we go, and we've got to be able to adjust to avoid some of the costs to the economy from policy decisions.
Okay. A last question for me, and then we come to you, and that's simply Cheryl, what's your bet? You're making many bets. Still, what's your bet as to the most, if you're looking at getting just to 2030, right, and meeting the targets that President Obama announced and the rest of it, which technologies are you betting on that are going to be the most important for achieving that in that time frame?
Well, I think, I hate to say, right, it is in all of the above kind of look, right? We need everything. We need significant...
You can't prioritize this at all.
No, I think, the reality is, if I look at the United States and the diversity of the sources of generation that we have today across the United States, just the physical demographics of, the constraints in New England, where you get a lot of, hydro coming across from Canada, but we have trouble with gas in the southeast and water challenges. Yeah, I don't think that one answer is going to work. And I think that's what we've seen. And I think that while uncomfortable is the very exciting thing for us about energy right now, is that we are able to and forced to run a number of large-scale experiments, so to speak, to see how and why some of these things play out. And I think work that's going on across DOE in partnership with our utilities, conversations going on with those who regulate about where and how we can do some of these things. Everything from distributed generation of gas, high high-intensity solar, flat panel solar, community solar, communities coming together in efficient environments, rethinking the grid itself, right, and the resiliency, the whole conversation that's been changed forever on the East Coast because of facing a devastating hurricane. So I think we have, and are live in, a series of experiments that are going to allow us to go after the targets we set. I don't think we take them lightly when we set them, but I think there is no one answer, which is not always comfortable. But I really believe that that's the case both in the 2030 and the well beyond that. It's why I think we'll surprise ourselves with how far we can go.
Jeppe, what are you betting on? What technology?
Well, I think for me, the most important part is that we achieve our climate goals. I mean, reducing emissions, basically. And I'm very open to any technology that could provide that goal. Just want to say that of course we are also a little bit captured by the structure we have in our energy industry already. What I said about the plants in Europe, of course, if you have a plant that you once created, a coal-based power plant, it's very cheap to use. So compare that price with a new investment in, for example, offshore wind farm, and of course you get two different prices. So I just want to say I want to think both about how we can achieve our CO2 emission goal, and also how we can make a new investment cycle where we invest in technologies that are good for the climate, the environment, but also, and we haven't talked about that in this discussion, but also strategical secure. I mean, we spent something like, and we spent something like 2,000 euro per citizen importing energy from abroad in Europe, mainly in Russia and in the Middle East. And that creates a lot of other externality problems for us. It's also a cost, a security cost, for example. Or we have air quality problems. That's also a cost that we have to calculate. So in my opinion, we need to think that all together and then find the best technologies that can solve that problem.
Okay. Let's at this point take, first let's start with a Twitter question from people who've been online. Gail Edmondson, our editorial director, what do you got?
Yes, from Maximo Miccinilli, a question perhaps for Jeff. It seems to me that innovation is somewhat disconnected from the overall EU 2030 package. Do we need a new framework to promote innovation in energy?
Well, I'm not sure what he's thinking of. I do think the mere fact that we have now a framework for 2030, as I said before, is very important, because then we can see that investors can see where Europe are aiming, what Europe are aiming for, and that's a precondition for these kind of investments. And then, of course, if you look at the 2030 climate package, energy package, there are also money for innovation. Maybe it's not enough. I think it's not enough, but there are money. For example, when the ETS system, it provides money for innovation, energy efficiency, and new innovation. So that's good. But I agree. I mean, we also have the Horizon 2020 program. We have energy focus there, a climate focus. So we need innovation, and we need a strong cooperation in Europe. But I'm not sure that I wish more innovation, but I'm not sure that the 2030 package itself is a problem. I think it's a step in the right direction.
Okay. All right. Yes, question there. Press the big red button on the microphone and introduce yourself.
Okay.
And by the way, let's make it a question. So go ahead.
Sorry?
Go ahead.
Yeah. Martin Wilhelm, I have a question to Iain. You've mentioned BP's view that the energy should be a key element of TTIP. And of course, energy being a part of TTIP has emerged mostly from the European side since the Ukraine crisis. So from that background, the main focus has been on facilitating LNG exports from the US, so more on the established fossil fuel side. Would you think it would be a good idea to also include energy innovation more specifically within TTIP across the space of the innovation chain that Cheryl has been talking about?
Yes, I do, and I have to admit, in a very small way, I tried to get people's attention on this, but seem to have failed. I'm slightly worried with TTIP processes that you end up heading for the lowest common denominator outcome. Last time we ended up with redesigning the shape of the common plug for electric vehicles, which, although a major step forward, probably wasn't going to solve the problem. I actually think, to your point, Martin, one of the most important things TTIP could have had as part of it is joint funded programs in research and development for energy efficiency and sharing energy efficiency technologies in multiple sectors. It hasn't got that as part of it, to my knowledge, and I think that's a shame. And that's not threatening anyone's industry, and we could have easily figured out a way of doing public and private research. We didn't, and that's a big problem. I think sharing technologies or licensing technologies and making that easier to happen across the Atlantic so that similar sectors in the same industries which are facing the competition from the emerging markets could learn from each other by licensing or sharing, again, I think could have been a big important part of it, and I don't think I've seen the visibility of it.
Thank you. Question there.
Jørgen Henningsen, former EU official on climate change and energy. It's a question mainly to Iain Conn about the Beijing agreement between what you call the US and China. I would ask you, or maybe challenge you a bit and say, would this rather have to be seen as an agreement between China and Obama? And the reason for my question is that if I understand correctly, in Paris there's not going to be an agreement that will require ratification of these numbers. And at the same time, if I understand correctly, it's unlikely that the present Congress will do anything legislative to support that agreement. And what is your view if we will see in 2 years' time a Republican president and a Republican Congress on this China-US, so-called US agreement?
Well, I'm going to have to.
Excuse me, I'm going to make Cheryl answer that one too.
So I was almost about to bow to Cheryl immediately, but just take a comment, which is, I'm not sure this is an agreement as much as an announcement, which is that both parties are actually making a big commitment, and it's not just about Europe, and I think that's really important. I don't think it's an agreement that requires ratification. I think it's encouraging that the US is getting this back on the agenda in a big way. I can't answer the question about what's going to happen post-Obama, but maybe Cheryl can.
Yeah, I don't even make predictions on technology, let alone about politics, so...
So we stop there.
Yeah, no. I mean, honestly, I think that as you look across the world, the world we live in is important to everyone. And it's a matter sometimes of how that gets bogged into politics. And I think to say how and why the politics will play out 3 years from now is just looking too far away. And I think we have to be encouraged by where we are today and the conversation and what it will be pushing forward. And it'll continue to evolve. But having a conversation is better than having no conversation, right? So.
Okay. Question there.
Question, I think. I'm David Victor from University of California, San Diego. A question for Cheryl and Jeff. The United States pays for ARPA-E, but the beneficiaries of the innovation are global because the technologies move all over the place. So that suggests that we actually ought to have a big global innovation program. And I'm wondering, what's your sense of how much bigger the spend could be on ARPA-E-like activities where we're still able to use the money effectively, and how would we organize this? Would we have an ARPA-E in Europe and one in China? We have kind of elements of that already. Would they be coordinated, or would there be some kind of a global enterprise? Help us understand how the global innovation system might look if we really did this seriously.
Yeah, so, I mean, we actually have this conversation quite often, right? Many countries, research arms will come and chat with us about innovation. It's very much on everyone's mind, the effectiveness of innovation. And so, so I'm always very careful when we talk about ARPA-E, and I hope you took away today to talk about why we've done what we did, right, at ARPA-E, and why I think what we've done is effective in the US ecosystem, right? And so I think that having more effective engagement of our technology worldwide is absolutely what we need to think about, but I think we have to think about what outcome do we want, in what place, and what structures are in place to figure out what tenets of ARPA-E you might want to copy or not, right? It's structure follows strategy. So what are you trying to do? Because in some places the structure won't work. Some countries aren't big enough to run the type of programs that we have, right? We are fortunate that we have the breadth of technologists in both industry and academia. Certainly that wouldn't always be the case to run independently. I do think that there's a lot of really great transformational ideas out there. Well more than we can fund even with the pools of applicants I have in the US. So our annual budget's about $280 million. You do also have to admit that once you get too big though, you can't run it the way we do it today, which is hands-on. I can pretty much rattle off to you most of our active projects myself. And that has a big advantage, because if I'm speaking to any of you, I know what might interest BP or not. So you'd have to start to think about doing these things by sectors. You would have to start to think about parsing into sectors, which has pros and cons. You start to lose some of the richness of the crossover of things that don't ordinarily belong together.
But if I can re-ask that question outside of the context of ARPA-E then, just international cooperation on R&D for energy technologies. So far we've only had one example, right? ITER, the fusion project. So, I mean, would it be helpful to have truly international cooperation, perhaps at an earlier stage in the cycle?
Right. So I do think we have a number of examples of things, right? I think IEA has driven a lot of projects and crossovers. I think there's a lot of people working on things. So I do think that that's out there. I think it might be more invisible than, I think it might be better advertised what's going on. I think rather than joint collaboration necessarily on all the research is how do we get better understanding of the market needs and how and why some of this technology could have traction in the markets. Because the markets are different around the world. There's different prices of things. There's different stages of technology where things can leapfrog. The assets are different in different places. And so I actually think that leveraging some of the international innovation could be better served if we had a better way of getting a view about the pull to the market, even more so to leverage it.
Well, the last thing I think is very important. I mean, then of course there's also a big role for energy policy cooperation globally and learn from each other. And we always did that. I mean, you mentioned the trading system when it comes to emissions, but in general, I think we should look at this as a way to enhance energy technology development. So that will be a good topic also for Paris next year, I guess.
Okay, a question right there.
Howard Rogers, Oxford Institute for Energy Studies. It's a question for Jep. It's my belief that Europe will run out of space and public tolerance for onshore wind before it's met its targets, and offshore wind is incredibly more expensive. It saddens me that policymakers in continental Europe seem to have given up on CCS because public opinion irrationally is happy to store methane underground but not CO2. What can be done to change this, to accelerate CCS in continental Europe, especially since some countries seem unable to kick their addiction to lignite and coal? Thank you.
Well, first of all, okay. All right. First of all, I think that I think about the different type of energy forms and the public opinion about it is very different from country to country, from region to region. Whether you like onshore windmill or not, I mean, it's also various in which country you are. Anyway, but I think you're right. I mean, I think if you look at the EU as such, the CCS technology and research in that field is also something that Europe should and will support. And I think that's important, first of all. I do think, again, when I talk about renewable, especially windmills, I mean, and wind turbines, the industry development and also the technological development has been increased a lot over the years. And I think, of course, also offshore wind farms should be competitive in the future if we continue investing in that. I think it will be. And again, it's all about where you are on the investment cycle. I mean, if you are beginning of new investments, I think many of these technologies are as competitive as other fossil fuel-based technologies. That's one thing. And also if you include all of the externalities that we don't include always, the destruction of our climate, our health, and other issues, I think many of these renewables, including wind, are actually competitive.
Okay, thank you. And the last question over there, and then we will have coffee.
Peter Atkin, Iain. When we're looking on the energy challenge, on the international cooperation, we have typically two sides. One is we have one single entity, maybe in energy, doing everything from generation, distribution, doing all the research and things, or we can have a more competitive system where we have separated entities for generation, for transportation, and things like that. And similar on a state level where we can say, okay, let's focus on the different regions, US against the EU, and so on. And I would like to hear a little bit your views on, well, what is the right way going forward and how to find the right balance between an integrated approach and a separated and competitive approach. Just turn it to the EU. The EU now talks about the energy union. However, energy is the issue of the member states, and we see quite different approaches on policy, like Denmark phasing out coal, Germany focusing on renewables, France focusing on nuclear, and how we get it together. And at the same time also we have cut down the energy business, electricity business in the areas generation, transport, and sale. And for sure we are losing advantages from cutting it down, but we are strengthening competition, getting it more efficient. And so the question is how we find the right balance between the two sides of the picture.
Let me start just about, firstly, I think the EU structure makes it really complicated to do some of this stuff because Brussels creates directives, but it's often up to member states to interpret and legislate how they're going to implement. And also, as we've talked and Cheryl talked, there's great danger in directing the answer down to the detailed level from the centre. But what I think you can do, in my opinion, is this, that Europe has learned enough to need an energy philosophy that's shared, but with enough space in that philosophy for member states to make some choices. And if that philosophy was formally agreed by the Council of Ministers, and they are obliged to encourage programs that align with it inside their member states, I think that would unlock a huge amount of inefficiency of resources and also align around some common programs. Let me give you an example. I think we now know that coal being substituted for natural gas is a very important direction that all regions need to try and go in. If that was part of the philosophy, but each country had an ability to figure out how fast, but not reverse the process by shutting down natural gas and growing coal, that would allow each country to come up with its own pace and view. Nuclear is a very important component, but some countries have a public opinion problem with nuclear. Therefore, they may not be able to implement nuclear, but it could be part of the philosophy, just as downsized, boosted internal combustion engines could be part of that philosophy, and every country could be able to have a program around either research or implementation on that. I think that would fundamentally change the way Europe approaches the whole energy equation, and it wouldn't require sectoral solutions, because as soon as you get into individual parts of individual companies trying to work together by mandate from the center, I think it becomes really difficult. So that's how I would approach it.
Okay. Let's draw a line here. I'd like to thank Iain, Cheryl, and Jeppe for this discussion, and thank you as well, and online as well.